Hello, this is a presentation of the California Escrow Association. Today we are going to talk about FIRPTA, what it is, how it affects our desk, and what we as settlement agents need to know. First of all, the disclaimer. The information contained in this presentation is only intended to provide a guide in the various transactions to which the information is applicable. No representation is made as to the legal validity of the information or the adequacy of it in any specific transaction. The information contained herein should only be used after consultation with the management of your company and with legal counsel. FIRPTA is an acronym for the Foreign Investment in Real Property Act. Federal regulations for this act was put in place in 1980, but it has taken the recent influx of foreign money to shine attention on it. It is safe to say that while our economy loves the investment, there are certain basic facts that we, as settlement agents, have to be aware of when dealing with foreigners. Hopefully, this presentation will give you an idea of general concerns. More complicated issues and legal aspects should, of course, always be referred to legal and financial counsel. So where does it all begin? There would be no sale, of course, if there were not the initial purchase of the real estate. The critical issues come when they sell the investment, but really, it all starts when they buy. The U.S. and our economy welcomes the investment of foreign money, whether it is for real estate or other goods and services. A foreigner does not have to have a green card, which denotes permanent resident status, or a tax identification number in order to make the investment. The foreign buyer deposits the funds in an escrow, and that is that. We happily take the money in, and there would be no special additional paperwork that we would require from this foreign buyer. Furthermore, under normal circumstances, we do not report the receipt of the funds or its source to the IRS. Again, we highly recommend that our buyers, foreign or not, seek their own legal and financial counsel on their federal and state tax liabilities and responsibilities before and after their investment is made. Although no tax identification number is required at the time of purchase, we strongly recommend that they get this TIN number immediately after, as the filing of income tax returns for the investments may be required at the year end. Sale. This is where the confusion and questions come in for the foreign seller. In order to effectuate the sale of the real property, every seller is required to complete and sign, under penalty of perjury, the Foreign Investment in Real Property Act FIRPTA form, which states that the seller is not a non-resident alien or a foreign person, and this form cannot be signed by the seller even if they have this tax identification number. It must be returned unsigned, which then becomes a notification to the parties and the settlement agent that he is a foreigner. Let me caution you regarding false FIRPTAs. A 999 starting TIN number is not a Social Security number issued to a permanent resident or U.S. national. The FIRPTA makes it a buyer's responsibility to withhold 10% of the sales price from the seller's net proceeds and send this amount to the IRS. Of course, the buyer is not going to be familiar with these government requirements, and this is where we, as settlement agents, get involved in the process. For better or worse, the buyers instruct the settlement agent to do this withholding and submission, so we have to become familiar with the process, and hence we have this presentation for you. You should fully disclose to the buyer that if the FIRPTA withholding is not done, it is going to be the buyer who will become liable for the withholding if it is not paid. One of the most important things about this whole process is that a TIN number from the foreign seller is needed in order to properly do the withholding. If the seller doesn't have one, it can be obtained by submitting Form W-7 to the IRS as soon as possible. We will require this TIN number by the time we close escrow, and as it takes 6 to 8 weeks to process, immediate attention is required. This is why we mentioned earlier that it behooves the buyer to obtain this TIN number when the initial purchase is made. The 10% amount is held even if the foreign seller is declaring a loss or no gain on his investment. If the 10% amount is more than what the seller's proceeds will cover, the seller will then need to bring in the difference to be deposited with the settlement agent. Be aware that this applies also to a short sale transaction, and so if that's the case, please apply for the TIN early if this is a short sale transaction. This 10% amount can be circumvented in a couple of ways. First of all, the foreign seller can submit to the IRS a request for a reduced withholding by using Form 8288B. This process may take up to 6 months, so again, we recommend that the process is started early and that an experienced CPA representative help with the submission. By the way, the IRS will automatically reject an application if the seller does not have a TIN number. Secondly, the buyer is willing and able to sign a buyer's affidavit stating that the sales price is $300,000 or less and that the buyer will occupy the property as his principal residence for 50% of the time for the first 2 years. Please note, this affidavit may provide unacceptable risk to the buyer who is doing this just to accommodate the seller's withholding problems. Legal counsel is recommended. Thirdly, the investment is made under a U.S. domestic corporation in which the qualifications under Section 1445 of the Internal Revenue Code are met. Please consult with your legal and financial counsel on this type of investment. Some sellers may transfer in or out of their corporate ownership just to avoid FIRPTA issues. The settlement agent, on behalf of the buyer, will remit the amount withheld directly to the IRS within 20 days from the day of closing to avoid incurring penalties, together with the 8288 and 8288A forms. Remember, these 2 forms requires the buyer's name, address, and TIN number as they are the withholding agent. It also requires the seller's name, address, and TIN number, without which it would be difficult for the IRS to credit the correct taxpayer's account. Please note, a late filing will result in a penalty of 25% of the withholding amount, and it is charged against the withholding agent, which is the buyer. The foreign seller will still have the responsibility of declaring the sale of his investment on the income tax return to be filed at the end of the year. At the time, the income tax return should include a copy of the 8288A form that the settlement agent used to remit the funds. If the funds sent to the IRS are more than what his tax liability is for that year, the IRS will refund the difference to the foreign seller. Finally, attach our copies of the 8288 form, 8288A, and 8288B forms. For further questions regarding the FIRPTA law, you can click on this following link. We hope this presentation has been of value to you. Please look for our next presentation in which we will deal with another issue regarding withholdings, whether it's for foreigners or not, and this is a requirement for the state of California. Thank you. This has been a presentation by the California Escrow Association.